forgiveness. He still broke out in a cold sweat when he recalled that evening. The next day he had attempted to apologise. Edoardo Martelli had refused to listen, while his wife had simply sobbed in embarrassment and heartbreak because her husband seemed determined to disown the grandson she adored. That had been the shocking moment when Enzo had realised that it didn't matter how much money he had, how many friends, or what exciting opportunities to enjoy himself still shone on his horizon. He had finally appreciated how much more his family meant to him, and his loving grandmother's distress had shamed him. And coming to England, taking charge of a small company recently acquired by his grandfather, and striving to live a more useful, normal life was the price of reconciliation. Only there was nothing normal about it, Enzo conceded in exasperation. Not on his terms. He drew up at the house he was to use. It was in the back of Beyond, a couple of miles from the nearest town and larger than he had expected. He was accustomed to spacious accommodation, but a serviced apartment would have suited him better than an old country house with a turret. He hoped it looked better inside than it did from the outside. Minutes later, Enzo contemplated the fresh horror of an antique furnished decor and an empty kitchen when he was starving. How the hell was he supposed to manage alone when he couldn't cook? First world problem, he lamented wryly, and probably the opening to a long line of such jarring wake-up calls. He would manage, of course he would. An hour later, the takeaway pizza he had ordered thrust into the bin in disgust, Enzo drove into the town to find a restaurant. He couldn't find one. He located a 24-hour supermarket, but drove past it, deciding that he could do without eating for one night. Instead, he went to check out the business he would be dragging into the 21st century. The office block beside the factory he had to overhaul was substantial. He would be as popular as poison when he arrived in the morning as the new CEO. It had been a family business, and there would be redundancies, restructuring, all the changes necessary to make the firm viable again. On his drive back to the house, he drove past a car parked by the side of the road, a young woman standing by its bonnet. A woman on her own in the dark with a broken-down car. A groan of frustration escaped him. He didn't want to get involved. Nobody would ever accuse Enzo of being a good Samaritan, but he was too well brought up to ignore the dangers threatening a woman in such a situation. Biting back a curse of irritation, he turned the car and drove back, buzzing down the window to lean out. 1 hour earlier. Skye lay where she fell after Richie threw her viciously away from him. She was so terrified she couldn't breathe, wasn't even sure a breath could manage to squeeze past her agonizingly sore throat. He had semi-strangled her, but only after he had first punched her in the face and the stomach to bring her down, glaring down at her like a madman, as though he hated her, and then kicking her. She felt as if she was broken inside, as though the world had stopped suddenly and flung her off at a height, and she was still falling. Shock was roaring through her because Richie had never hit her before. He had shouted, but there had never been any violence. Richie was still ranting, crashing about the bedroom, slamming doors, shouting abuse back at her. She stayed still, eyes shut tight, afraid he would notice her again, hurt her again. Or worse, get so mad at her lack of response that he hurt the children. Brody, the poor little mite, having seen the attack, had rushed in front of her in a pathetic toddler attempt to protect her, but she had managed to get between him and Richie and get Brody into the safety of his bedroom. Her frantic intervention had only made Richie angrier than ever. She needed to get herself and the kids out of the apartment fast, But Richie would never willingly let